This week on the Property Podcast, we've got a license to educate because we're talking about landlord licensing. It may not sound like the most exciting topic in the world, but it is crucial as a property investor. You understand what it is and what you need to do. But don't worry, this week we tell you just that.
Welcome to the Property Podcast, where every Thursday morning property investors come to be informed and inspired. Thank you for joining us. We've got loads of good stuff for you this week. Our main discussion is around landlord licensing, something that you may have heard of, thought doesn't apply to you, or put to the back of your mind because it's so difficult to understand. But we are going to be fixing that for you today. And stick around to the end, because in Hub Extra, we're sharing a resource that makes it really easy to do your bit to make the planet a little bit better.
Okay, so this week's news story, Rob, it seems something to do with the world's greatest city. What's the report?
Watford is in the press. Liverpool has endorsed a 2 million square foot office master plan. So this is a story from Place Northwest. It says that the City Council has signed off plans to help build a world-class commercial business district in the heart of Liverpool to tackle a shortfall of offices in the city. So, Rob, this seems like more really positive news for Liverpool.
It is, but the reason why we picked this news story out is there's so much positivity around Liverpool right now. So many of the projects, whether it's the port, Liverpool Waters, or Wirral Waters over the Mersey, there's so much positivity. But what Liverpool is actually really lacking is high-quality office space. Of course, it has it. That's why so many businesses are there. But this project is huge, and this master plan is really ambitious. And I think that's testament to the ambitions of the city and what they're trying to do here. Because they are really making a statement to say we are open for business and you should consider us. The article talks about how they lack the space for truly huge businesses to relocate to the city. There's not enough office space to accommodate for those businesses. And this master plan addresses that in a very big way. So of all the exciting things you may hear about Liverpool, this may not be top of the list, but we actually think it's one of the most important. And with so many of the listeners looking at Liverpool as an investment area, we just wanted to bring it to your attention to make you feel a little bit better.
Advance warning time. We're a few weeks away from our final Property Hub meetups of the year. It's the first Thursday of every month, so the next ones will be on the 5th of December. But even though that's a few weeks away, make sure if you want to come along, you book your ticket now. They're getting more popular every month. Last month, lots of the meetups sold out, and we had some people disappointed they missed out. We had some cheeky people turning up and seeing if they could just get in on the door. But no, you must have a ticket. And we have firm limits because we want to keep these meetings small and focused and make sure you can get around and talk to everyone and have a really positive experience. So don't delay. If you want to come along on the 5th of December, then book your ticket now. Go to propertyhub.net/meetups.
Yeah, and don't be sneaking in near Christmas. The elves will be watching and that'll hurt your Christmas present chances. So we don't want that. But what we do want is more YouTube. Hooray! So Rob and I are back on the screen. I was going to say big screen, but you might be watching on your phone, so it could be a small screen. But anyway, we're back on YouTube, brand new video out. It's all about tax, everything you need to know. So tax used to be, in most circles, a little dull. But now, to property investors, it's one of the more sexier topics out there because we all need to understand it. So we've put a video together that you can take advantage of it. Go to YouTube now, search for Property Hub UK. Subscribe while you're there, turn the little bell thing on that everyone talks about, but make sure you do because we're churning out more and more on YouTube and we've got some really ambitious plans for next year as well. So make sure you subscribe and of course watch that lovely new vid.
So, landlord licensing. Not one of the most clickbaity, attention-grabbing subjects we've covered on the podcast, but something that you as a property investor need to know about. It might be something that you've ignored because in the past it's something that only applied to HMOs and maybe have in your mind that that's still the case. But no, depending on where you are, even with single let, licensing is something you might need to know about. It's not straightforward, but don't worry, that's what this episode is all about. But Rob, I said that licensing used to be something that just applied to HMOs. So let's start with a quick overview of HMO licensing before we get into the main topic, which is licensing of single lets.
Now, the first thing to say about HMO licensing is in Scotland, you need a licence regardless of the property. If it's HMO, you need a licence. But in England and Wales, it's different. You need a HMO licence nationally if you have a property let to 5 or more people, making up at least 2 separate households. Now, there are a number of conditions that you'll need to meet. For example, the minimum size of the rooms, So they have to be above a certain size, who's managing the property, and more. Some councils also require licensing for smaller HMOs, known as additional licensing. Now, each council can decide which types of HMO it wants to apply additional license to. For example, those of 2 or more stories, or those with 4 or more people, or all of them. Councils can also decide not to allow any HMOs to be created in certain areas. So if they believe there's an oversaturation, for example. So just following along what's done nationally might not be enough. So you need to be aware that councils can have different rules and conditions as well.
So that's HMO licensing, but you may also require a license for a non-HMO property. So anything at all, let to a single person, let to a family, house, flat, whatever it is, you might need a license, but it depends on where the property is. So in Scotland, you don't need a licence as such, but you need to register with the local council and the Scotland Landlord Register. So not a licence as such, but you need to register the property. In Wales, you need to register with the Rent Smart Wales scheme. In Northern Ireland, you need to register with the Landlord Registration Scheme. And in England, it's nowhere near as straightforward. So in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, across the whole country, the rules are the same. But in England, it varies from council to council. So the default position in England is that unless the council has said otherwise, you don't need any kind of licence at all to let a property that isn't an HMO. But each local authority can choose, if they want to introduce something called selective licensing. And that means that properties that fall within a selective licensing area do need a licence. Now, it's called selective licensing because when it was introduced, it was only meant to apply to small areas where standards need to be improved. So if a local authority had a particular area of town or even just a space of 3 streets where they believed that properties were in bad condition, there were antisocial behaviour problems, improvements were needed in some way, they would just draw a line around that area and say, within that area, you need a licence. And in some places, that's still the case. But some councils have stretched the definition of selective a little bit and applied it virtually everywhere. So in Nottingham, for example, not so selective. Pretty much everywhere in Nottingham, you'll need a licence. So what this boils down to is when you buy a new property, you'll need to check if you need a licence. If you're buying properties in multiple locations across the country, then of course you won't be familiar with the schemes in different areas, so you'll need to check. But even if you're operating largely within one area, it's still possible that you'll have one part of town where a licence is needed and another where it's not. So on every occasion when you're buying a new property, it's a check that you'll need to make.
So what are the requirements? Well, every local authority has its own set of requirements, but broadly speaking, the property needs to be managed by a fit and proper person, which if you listen to the Property Podcast, you automatically tick that box. You will also need to provide relevant safety certificates and consents. It will be licensed for 5 years and then you'll have to renew. Now, they'll apply certain conditions like providing certain information to tenants and undertaking regular inspections. Basically, it's all the same stuff you should be doing by law anyway, which makes it all a bit pointless, but we'll get onto that a bit later.
So you need to check if you need a licence, you need to apply for that licence, and when applying for that licence, you need to pay. So how much does a licence cost? You guessed it, it varies. There seems to be a bit of a theme here. And the cost of a licence actually varies massively. So they're normally issued for 5 years. A 5-year licence in the cheapest local authority in England costs £55. In the most expensive, it costs £1,150. And the average across the UK is £591. So you might get lucky, you might get unlucky, but you can expect this licence to cost you a little over £100 a year, and you have to pay for all of it up front. So you make an application, you pay your money, and then you might expect that someone would come round and inspect the property to make sure that it actually meets all the criteria that it's supposed to. And in theory, that could happen. But in practice, they practically never inspect properties before issuing the license. Really, it's only something they do if they've got some kind of cause for concern. Maybe it's a property that's been flagged to them for some other reason. They could also inspect the property after granting the license to make sure that you're maintaining all the conditions that you agreed to at the start. Again, though, they only inspect a tiny, tiny fraction of the total number of properties that are supposed to be licensed every year. So it's possible that someone will contact you about an inspection, but it's very unlikely.
So if you're unfamiliar with licensing, or this is the first time you're hearing about it, it could be a little bit daunting. but it doesn't have to be. Let's take you through the steps that you need to take when investing in a property and possibly checking your existing portfolio as well. What you should be doing, really, before buying, is check if a license is needed. And it's relatively simple. You just go to Google, type the name of the council plus selective licensing, and you'll probably find out just from that. From there, you'll be able to check a map to see if your property falls in with the area they've chosen. If you do need a license, follow the council's guidelines to apply. You might be able to do it online, but you might, because these are councils, have to do it on paper, and you'll need to supply all kinds of certificates and proof. If you use a letting agent, check who should be the license holder. Some councils insist that the license should be issued to the person who has day-to-day control, which is the agent, and some allow you to do it jointly. Now, some letting agents might do the application for you for a fee, and others will want you to do it and then have you send them the evidence. You'd like to think, though, that your letting agent will be at least familiar with licensing, and if you're educating them on the whole concept of it, then you might need to start looking around. So while it's a bit of hassle, it is straightforward.
It is. There's all kinds of admin you need to do when buying a property, and this is just another bit. It can seem daunting because there's so little consistency and you have to dig around a bit to find out what applies in a particular area, but it's not all that difficult. So that's when you're buying a property for the first time. But there's a chance that you're listening to this and going, I've heard of some things about licensing. I think I'm probably meant to have one in this area, but I don't. What do I do about it? And if that is the case, don't panic. You're not about to get a knock on the door. Don't let it ruin your day. It's going to be fine. It's something that you should sort out, but it's not a big deal because you're not alone. Rates of compliance with selective licensing schemes are extremely low. Every single local authority that has selective licensing has thousands of properties that should be licensed but aren't, either because the landlord doesn't know that they're meant to be doing this, as is the case with you, or that they do know and they just can't be bothered. The problem for local authorities is that they don't actually know how many properties are meant to be licensed. They suspect they know how many properties are being rented out in their area, but they don't actually know. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a bit dubious about this whole exercise.
The idea of licensing or selective licensing, in theory, could be actually quite good. You know, there's lots of people in property that probably shouldn't be. And if this was done properly, it would professionalise our whole sector, our whole industry. But the problem is it's not been done well. Every council has their own interpretation of what it is or what it should be. They have their different rules. There's no uniform approach to this, which makes it really difficult as a property investor or landlord. And some councils are clearly just in it for the money, which you can understand because they're underfunded, but it doesn't make our lives any easier. They're not probably that bothered about licensing at all, and that's why so little is done after the licenses are issued. So the way it is done is a bit of a nightmare, and it's just another hurdle that as property investors we need to get over. But I think what is frustrating is that idea itself, not too bad at all. The delivery, it's awful.
Yeah, the bit that gets me is that because there's no central national register, councils don't know how many properties they're meant to be licensing in the first place. So you have this scheme, but if someone doesn't apply, they don't apply for a license, what are the chances of them actually getting caught? There's no list that anyone could look at to say, here are all the properties that are meant to be licensed, here are the ones that are, let's go after all the ones that aren't. That list doesn't exist. So it seems pretty logical to me. If you do have bad landlords, they're exactly the ones who are unlikely to apply. So in the end, you end up only policing the landlords who are complying with what they should be doing in the first place. So I don't really see the point. Maybe in an ideal world, you would have somebody come round and inspect every single property before it's let out to make sure that it's safe and it meets all the requirements. But as those resources aren't in place, you can't send someone round to every property. You end up just asking for things like a gas safety certificate and an EPC and various other things. But all those are required by other legislation anyway. So it seems like this weird halfway house where you're not actually inspecting, but you're going beyond just asking someone to register. The system in Scotland where you just have to register a property makes a lot more sense to me, and it saves a lot of paperwork and expense, which, as implemented, seems pretty pointless to me. I'm sure councils would disagree. I'm sure they'll be able to point to some good things that they've done as a result. But even though I don't think it's really doing anything useful, from a property investor's point of view, it's just another thing that has to be done and another cost to factor in. It's a bit of an annoyance. Maybe it's something that will get better over time, but it's certainly not something that should put you off investing and not something that you should let stress you out.
Our success story of the week comes from Sheenan. And she's dropped us a message on Instagram to say the following. I just want to say a big thank you for all your podcasts. They liven up the journey to work and fill us with hope of fulfilling our long-term goals. We've been listening for 8 months and just bought our first 2 investments through the Property Hub Invest team. A big thank you to Charles for looking after us and helping us develop a strategy to move closer to our dreams. 10 out of 10. We recommend you to anyone remotely interested in property investment. Cheers and keep up the excellent content. Well, we will do our best to keep it up, but you keep up with that excellent progress. As we say every week in this part of the show, it's about taking action. We'll give you the tools, we'll give you the information, but you've got to go on and do it. And it's so pleasing that pretty much every week there's a story that we can tell that we're seeing through Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or through iTunes reviews, however you want to do it. It's great that you're getting in touch and letting us know that you're moving forward. So if you are taking action, congratulations. And also let us know in the social channels. You'll find us at Property Hub UK.
Just before we end the show for this week, we've just got time to squeeze in Hub Extra, the section where we give you that little bit more, a resource, a tool, a thought, something to improve your week. And you'll find even more in the Hub Extra email that will hit your inbox every Friday morning without fail if you're a Property Hub member. This week, we're sharing something called Team Trees at teamtrees.org. If you want to do something good for the planet, if you want to plant some trees, but you don't want to get soil all over your hands, then you can donate to Team Trees instead. $1 plants 1 tree, and they're on a mission to plant 20 million of them by the 1st of January 2020, so not long to go. But unbelievably, they're up to 14.7 million, and this is all started by a YouTuber. When he hit 20 million subscribers, someone challenged him to plant 20 million trees. He started this whole thing, and they're already up to nearly 15 million. So it's a really brilliant example of how the YouTube community can be used to achieve something really positive, which if you've read any YouTube comments ever, you might not have thought was possible. And it's also really easy to get involved.
So go and check that out. And also, while you're on YouTube, if you go and have a look at that YouTuber, make sure you look at us. We're not quite at 20 million subscribers yet, but once you subscribe, we're one step closer. And we'll make it worth your while by producing lovely new videos like we have done this week, that great video on tax. And we'll be back with Ask Rob and Rob next week. And of course, the Property Podcast next Thursday. So until then, you've got plenty to get on with. Take care. Have fun. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.